Voilà.
Elle fera ce qu'elle peut.
Normalement, elle avait aussi 45 minutes, mais elle devait commencer à moins le quart, non? Il n'y a pas un problème d'horaire?
Oui. Si, on a commencé un peu tard.
Ouais, on commence en retard, malheureusement. Et
ouais, ça a décalé. Ouais.
They haven't started. It's okay.
Oui, bien sûr. Non, on va essayer de... D'accord, merci. Hi again, everyone. Welcome to this new head talk, which is entitled, Is Distance Education the Ugly Duckling Finally a Swan? So today, this head talk will be presented by Professor Asha Kanwar, who is one of the world's leading advocates of learning for sustainable development, and she is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Commonwealth of Learning. Throughout a career spanning over 35 years, she has made outstanding contributions in the areas of teaching, research, and international development. Professor Kanwar received her undergraduate, master's, and doctorate degrees from the Punjab University in India and University of Sussex in the UK. Her areas of expertise include open distance and technology-enabled learning, open educational resources, quality assurance, gender, and organizational development. Professor Kanwar has written and edited a dozen of books, published over 100 papers and articles, and delivered numerous keynotes at prestigious international conferences. So we are very happy to have you here, Professor Kanwar. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Distinguished colleagues, this could well be a fireside chat, really, for the number of people that are here. But let me begin by offering a disclaimer. As I come from a traditional community in India, I was married midway during my bachelor's degree. The only way I could complete my higher education was through distance education. So if you find that I'm an advocate of distance learning, you're right, I am. But most people think that open and distance learning, or ODL, is second chance and second rate. In short, the ugly duckling of higher education. Is this true? Has the pandemic transformed this ugly duckling into a swan? It might first help to go back to the origins of this ugly duckling and how it delivered value over the years. Yet strangely, negative perceptions continue to linger. No one in the history of education could have imagined the pandemic, which disrupted the world as a black swan. Was this also the moment when the black swan catalyzed the transformation of open and distance learning into a beautiful swan? So, where did the story begin and why? As far back as 1728, the Boston Gazette advertised a shorthand course to persons around the country, offering several lessons sent weekly and promising that they would be as perfectly instructed as those students that lived in Boston. Distance or location would not compromise learning. When the penny post started in England, 19th century, Pitman's shorthand training became a popular distance learning course. The Ugly Duckling was born as a startup offering livelihoods opportunities in the 18th and 19th centuries. Children in the Canadian prairies, and of course in Australia and other places, with no schools for miles around, received lessons at home and were supported by parents and siblings. Doesn't this sound very similar to what happened during the pandemic. Committed to reaching the shoemaker in the garret, the University of London opened several centers overseas to offer external degrees in the erstwhile colonies in the 19th century, opening access to those who would otherwise not have the opportunity. Like in West Africa, in Mauritius, there were so many centers for external degrees run by the University of London. The University of South Africa started distance learning in 1946 during the apartheid years, offering education to a multiracial student body. Of course, alumnus included Nelson Mandela, who turned to distance education during his long incarceration. The UK too felt the need to create an open university to use technologies to reach those who did not have access to traditional campus institutions, a model that was adopted and adapted by policymakers around the world to throw open the ivory towers of higher learning. Throughout its history, the impulse underlying distance education was to reach the unreached, those in remote areas, marginalized communities, and persons with disabilities. These are photos from CALL's Lifelong Learning for Farmers project, where people learn using basic mobile phones, goat rearing, and other kind of farming techniques. So using Christensen's disruptive innovation model in higher education, we find that distance education was the real innovation at the bottom of the pyramid that continues to challenge mainstream face-to-face higher education. Campus institutions, as we know them in the modern world, have consolidated their position over 900 years of existence, and the state, students, and parents continue to sustain the demand for them, often promoting elitism and exclusion. However, distance education began to cater to those who were left outside the mainstream. So distance education really is an innovative disruption. Even with its focus on social justice and inclusion, distance education continued to remain an unsung ugly duckling. So it might help to review what we mean by distance education and open learning to understand this paradox. Distance education primarily refers to the separation of teacher and learner, which is mediated by some kind of technology. This is what we experienced when we pivoted to emergency remote learning during the pandemic. Open education describes policies and practices that permit entry to learning with as few barriers as possible. While distance education and open learning are not the same, they are often used in a complementary manner. The founding Vice-Chancellor of the Open University of the UK, Lord Crowther, defined openness in relation to people, places, methods, and ideas. I mean, how revolutionary this idea was. And this is the basic philosophy of open and distance learning, or ODL. Put into practice, this means that institutions have flexible entry requirements, allow learners to choose the courses they wish to study, and accumulate credits at their own pace and convenience. Charles Wiedemeyer, an American, was a visionary who described openness way back in 1973. And this narrative was only familiar to distance educators. Now, today we even have a UNESCO recommendation on OER and open access. Open and distance learning has developed over the years, and Professor Taylor's 5 generations of distance learning sum up the evolution from correspondence education to multimedia to online provision, which includes the use of AI in teaching and learning. Open and distance learning meant structured learning, which requires systematic planning, design, and development. Learner support is critical, and a range of technologies are used to reach learners in their own space, time, and convenience. And research shows that blended learning, which is a combination of both distance and in-person, is more effective in developing countries. ODL has proved its effectiveness by opening up access, improving the quality of learning, reducing costs, supporting inclusion, and at the same time, demonstrating a lower carbon footprint. So where's the evidence? First, access. Distance education has been used around the world to democratize higher education. There are 33 open universities in the Commonwealth countries, and they cater to 5 million learners annually. So think of it, if these institutions weren't there, where would these 5 million people go? Second, quality. Research shows that there's no significant difference between distance and traditional classroom instruction in terms of learning outcomes. Yet that negative perception persists, that it's not as effective as class-based education. In fact, research also shows in some instances that students in blended learning performed marginally better than those in the classroom. Third, costs. Distance learning costs substantially less than campus provision. Another study found that while face-to-face costs per participant in a teacher training course were about $7 US, the same training was offered online at half the costs with comparable outcomes. And the National Knowledge Commission in India had done a study some years ago where they showed that open universities cost about 1/3 compared to campus institutions. Fourth, inclusion. Persons with disabilities have also found distance learning more accessible. And studies show that more persons with disabilities join open and distance learning institutions as they don't need to travel to campus or seek accommodation near the institution. ODL is more flexible and offers content in various formats so that learners can read, watch, or listen to lectures. And ODL also provides a degree of anonymity where students with disabilities can interact with professors and peers without feeling discriminated. Fifth, ecology. With all our concerns about climate change, studies in the UK and Botswana show that the carbon footprint of a distance learning student is 1/3 compared to that of their campus counterpart, and most of it is related to the kind of travel back and forth. In addition, the Open University of China used open and distance learning for poverty alleviation by adopting targeted interventions to support village communities, which improved the income and livelihoods of about 5,000 people. But in spite of all these benefits that ODL provides, paradoxically, it has remained unsung and in the margins. Many countries make a clear distinction between qualifications acquired on campus and through ODL, often questioning the quality and integrity of this mode. And you can see, these are newspaper headlines from different countries in different parts of the world where they de-recognized qualifications, Ethiopia, Ecuador, so many countries. But years of advocacy would not have achieved the overnight pivot to ODL that the advent of the Black Swan triggered. I'm referring to Nassim Taleb's book, which refers to the Black Swan as the unexpected and sudden event that changes the course of history. And so the pandemic has. COVID-19 caused the biggest disruption of education in human history. The closure of campuses affected more than 220 million higher education students worldwide. At this time, there was a phenomenal increase in massive open online courses, or MOOCs, not just through the global brands like Coursera and FutureLearn, but also universities, which had earlier hesitated to offer online courses, came to offer MOOCs, especially for professional development. But who do the MOOCs really reach? They do connect the world in a global classroom, but more than 50% of those enrolled already have college degrees, and less than 30% of MOOC participants have lower qualifications. So how can this kind of technology be used to cover the rest? We are talking about leaving no one behind in this conference. One silver lining during the pandemic has been the global acceptance of distance and online learning. A study in the UK found that the majority of higher education students rated the quality of online learning as excellent. But because of lack of connectivity, purely online options do not work for everyone. For example, students in South Africa and Zimbabwe considered online learning elitist and called for its boycott. But open and distance learning has various kinds of technologies, has been tried and tested. It's a tried and tested alternative for such students. Open educational resources were also in high demand as teachers looked for quality digital content. In a North American study conducted during the pandemic, 44% of administrators were positive about faculty use of OER, while a quarter of teachers believed that OER could contribute significantly to teaching and learning. A study conducted by the OER Foundation and the Commonwealth of Learning found that over 75% of the respondents expressed high demand for OER-based online courses. The pandemic has also seen the second coming of video learning, where teachers made significant contributions, often reaching their students through mobile devices. Paul developed a video-on-demand service for providing quality content in low bandwidth contexts in the Pacific. Formal assessments and proctoring systems also suffered major setbacks during this time, where institutions adopted innovative approaches to build flexible models and make assessments more authentic. But people forget that open universities have always adopted formative assessments with multiple entry and exit points. Credits can be earned and stacked towards various qualifications, similar to what is now being proposed as this great innovation, micro-credentials. During the pandemic, open universities were able to remain open even as campus institutions closed. India's ecosystem of distance learning comprises 19 open universities, educational TV channels, and government-supported MOOC platforms. The new national policy on education lays an emphasis on ODL, and I'm quoting, to improve access, increase gross enrollment ratios, and provide opportunities for lifelong learning, unquote. So I think governments are beginning to come around to accepting ODL as a viable option. A survey conducted on distance students in Ghana found that online learning was only preferred when gadgets were made available, content presented well, and students convinced of the benefits to them. The pandemic has led to the adoption of distance learning in some form or the other by all campus institutions, and the perceptions of both students and teachers are now more positive. So are we seeing a blurring of boundaries between the two modes and a convergence? Was this the moment when the ugly duckling was transformed? It was also time to build on the momentum that ODL has gained and implement the lessons learned to transform higher education. So let me give you examples why it's very important that we do this. We know that even before the pandemic, it was estimated that most targets of SDG 4, which aspires to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all would not be achieved by 2030. In fact, the targets were being pushed as far, especially for tertiary education, by 2070. The pandemic has set us back even further with severe learning losses globally. ODL approaches can be harnessed to accelerate progress towards remediation and leaving no one behind. At the recently held Conference of Commonwealth Education Ministers in Nairobi just 15 days ago, there was a clear call for increasing education expenditure to 6% of the GDP, or 15 to 20% of total public expenditure. Within the context of the current economic downturn, many governments may not be able to respond to this call, and we know that how unrealistic it will be. A study shows that the cost of higher education student per year in South Africa was 88,000 Rand, which is equivalent to $5,000. The gross enrollment ratio in Africa, in general, overall on the continent, is 9.4%. So if we are trying to reach 40 and 50% for national development, it's not going to be possible by using investments in conventional brick and mortar institutions, but we do need innovative and alternative approaches. Teachers are central to every recovery effort. And in Italy, another study shows that teachers who were convinced of the benefits of distance education because of the new teaching experience, saving of time and fuel because they were working from home and online, and exchanging ideas with colleagues, were able to achieve better outcomes for their learners, which means teacher capacity is very important and their mindset is very important if we want to improve the quality. As countries skill and reskill citizens for the new normal, ODL will have a key role to play. My organization, CALL, worked with Coursera on this workforce recovery project, which trained over 150,000 Commonwealth citizens. Many of them were first-time online learners. Establishing help desks to provide learner support and counseling resulted in higher completion rates. Since ODL is a viable option, how can we promote it further? Intergovernmental organizations such as UNESCO and CALL can play a major role in advocating for mainstreaming ODL as a means of achieving sustainable development. Governments can invest in national ODL policies, ICT infrastructure, and capacity development. Educational institutions can adopt targeted interventions to increase access, improve quality, and reduce costs and carbon emissions by mainstreaming quality ODL. So to come back to the question that we started with, that when will the ugly duckling become a swan? I think the clear response is that as an innovative disruption with an entrepreneurial spirit and a focus on equity, distance education has always been a swan. And it took one major pandemic to achieve this realization. So with that, let me thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor, for sharing this brilliant speech about the positive effects and the potential of distance learning in higher education. Now we're going to take some questions from the public. Is there any question? Yes, please.
Yeah, my name is Abdelbad from the Sudan. Thank you. Thank you for this very informative and very good presentation. But I noticed there is some things should be revised. In one of your slides, you mentioned Bahrain banned distance education. Am I right?
That was in 2015.
Sorry?
2015, not today.
Not today, not even 20.
No, those are all newspaper headlines that are from the past.
But
And in fact, Ethiopia banned, but then they reinstated after 6 months. So many countries did that.
I agree with you that recognition of distance education is low in the area. But in Bahrain itself, there is a branch of the Arab Open University, using open. I used to be dean of faculty in this university in Kuwait. And so this branch in Bahrain actually started to make the acceptance of, started to be accepted, this mode of system. I just wish to revive the fact about Bahrain and so on.
No, but thank you so much, because the other thing is that many quality assurance agencies kept distance education separate and didn't sort of evaluate it and assess it with the other campus institutions. I think all that has changed because of the pandemic now. I mean, they want to understand and know how to do this going forward. So I think, thank you for sharing, because I think MENA region is very active as well in quality assurance of distance education and more acceptance now.
Yes.
Yeah, there's another point, actually.
Sure.
You mentioned we need, say, the effort of the government and the UNESCO and so on. And there is a very important body in all countries, especially in the Arab area and the Middle East, that is the regional UNESCO recognition and qualifying committees. And this could play a very important role if we paid attention to them, educate them, and so on, so that they can actually make some change in the society regarding distance education.
Thank you. I mean, we're already a partner with Alexo. They are a big regional body. 22 Arab countries are part of it. So regional bodies have a big role to play. I was just giving you an indicative example, not exhaustive. Yes, somebody else? Yeah.
Thank you very much for such a great presentation. I enjoyed it very much, even though I didn't know what to expect when I came here. So I'm Alexandra Nikolic, and I'm coming from Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. And for us, I would say that for us is still awful duckling, this distance learning and education. I would like to ask you to give us more details about micro-credentials. You just said such a beautiful invention, and just tell a few words more about that, why you think it's such beautiful. So, thank you.
Thanks. I mean, this is something which we've been doing in distance education for years, that you can collect credits. We never used the word stackable, but we said, you can collect credits and go for first certificate, then diploma, then a degree. So that was a kind of version of micro-credentials. Today, people have lost the ability to, sort of go for long-term training programs. They want quick, just-in-time training because of all this skilling and reskilling that's required. Now, for just-in-time training, you need badges, microcredits, and so on, which you can then sort of keep stacking as and when you collect them towards a bigger degree. So this is what is happening now. And I think people, during the pandemic, used very interesting ways of assessing students. For example, in UNISA, University of South Africa, how do people, they were not connected and they're living in a shanty. But most people had phones. So they could write the exam, take a photo, and send it to the examination branch at headquarters to be assessed for what they had done, their assignment or so on. So people found open book exams, the authentic assessments. Now this is something which has become very current. And CALL has developed resources on how these things can be done. On our website, if you go, all those resources are OER. You can access and use as you wish.
Thank you. We'll take one last question.
My question, I'm Dr. Deeksha Rajput. I'm from the University Grants Commission, New Delhi, India.
Can you put your mouse near the mic?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The faculty members, several of the faculty members have apprehensions regarding, technology-enabled teaching, because they have this feeling that they might be out of job if everything is online. There's a lot of focus on online teaching, learning. So how do we address those apprehensions?
The apprehensions are also not related to that they'll be jobless, but they don't simply have the capacity. And that's why I said teachers are very important, to get them on side, to change the mindset and to build the capacity, especially in digital literacy and digital fluency, in fact. Literacy is not going to be enough. So if we can do that in a kind of very systematic way, and I know that India had done that through the National Institute for Open Schooling, trained about 2 million teachers, and the government had said that if you don't complete your training in 2 years, you'll be jobless. So they did it, or whatever, something like that, 1.5 million or 2 million, something like that. So I think governments have a role to play. When governments offer a circular, people listen. And if governments offer incentives or disincentives, as the case may be here, people listen. So I think those three categories of stakeholders have a big role to play that I've just shared with you.
Incentives are being offered, whether for developing online content, MOOCs. There is monetary provision for that. Incentives are being offered in promotion also. But still, it seems there are still apprehensions are there. So I thought maybe.
No, but these things take time. It doesn't happen overnight. It has to take time.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you so very much for such an exhaustive and impressive presentation. I am Mamta Agarwal, Advisor 1 with All India Council for Technical Education. One is I wanted to know that how do you see online education vis-a-vis ODL? That was one. And do you feel that ODL is equally effective at all levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary education? And should the same teacher who are teaching in conventional teaching mode be trained, or we specifically need teachers trained in ODL pedagogy? Thank you.
The first question, the basic difference between pure online and distance learning is that distance learning has always been a blended approach. That you always looked at, because it always had this social justice agenda. So if people can be reached through radio, you use radio to reach them. You don't offer online courses because you don't want to widen the digital divide. So I think that's the fundamental difference, that you go according to the specific context and offer blended approaches. The second was about,
ODL is equally effective at all the levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary, or specifically more at tertiary level?
No, secondary and tertiary, not at primary. We don't promote that at primary. At primary, what we do is we train teachers to improve, the classroom practice, but primary is a little difficult.
And the same teachers who are teaching in conventional teaching mode should be trained for ODL, or specifically, teachers trained in ODL pedagogy, which is a little different from the conventional one?
I think all teachers need to be trained in good pedagogy, good teaching and learning. It's not only for them or for them, it's for everybody. And ultimately, at the bottom of it all is a culture of care. If you care for your student, you naturally build your capacity to ensure that they have the best experience when they're dealing with you. So I think this is for everyone.
And a strong sense of belongingness to students, that brings in a lot of desire.
That culture of care is very important. They have to care for the students.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this amazing conversation. So we have now to close the session. I hope you all enjoyed it. Today we have finished the head talks, but tomorrow there will be several others. Thank you so much. Thank you.